Okay, well, we've got a good group here, so let's get started so we can make use of the time here. So thanks everyone for joining us again today. This is another session in our Masterclass series looking at BI and AI governance strategies. And this week we're going to be talking about how you can drive better engagement and broader participation in BI governance programs. I'm Mike Smitherman, look after sales and marketing over here at Metric Insights. Have Marius Moscovici with us again. Hi, Marius.
Hi, Mike. Great to doing this again.
Some quick housekeeping things. There's a few more people trickle in here. So, as usual, we are recording this, so it will be up on our YouTube channel, Metric Insights, along with the previous sessions that we've done. If you weren't able to see those live, you can catch up on the recordings. So we'll send out a link as well after this to all of those. Um, Lines are muted, obviously, so but happy to take Q&A. Feel free to add questions into the chat window or the Q&A window, and we'll keep track of those. If we don't answer them as we go along, we'll spend a few minutes at the end getting to those. So I think that's all the housekeeping stuff. So with that, as usual, I'll hand over to Marius to start off, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about how to really drive broad participation in BI governance. And I'm somebody who's very excited about BI governance. I obviously, since you're attending this webinar or this masterclass, you're interested in BI governance and you feel passionate about that. But the truth is that for most people, especially most people in your organization, or maybe almost all people in your organization, governance is just a very dull topic, and it's a kind of it's a big snooze fest. And in fact, I would kind of invite you to try this little exercise. Next time you go to one of your company events, if somebody comes and walks up to you and starts talking to you, and you really don't want to talk to that person, just switch the conversation to the importance of governance. And I bet you that within 30 seconds, that individual will make some kind of excuse that they need to go to the bathroom or go get a drink or go see Joe over there or whatever, and they will be gone. And that's because really nobody wants to talk about governance. Nobody wants to think about governance if you're not part of governance within the organization. Even in many cases, senior management, unfortunately, will be looking at governance as more of a check the box thing in some cases, and rather than really be passionately interested in it. And so let's look before we kind of talk about how to address that. Why is that? What's the perception? Well, it's that for most people, governance feels like it is time consuming, right? It's something that, boy, it's going to take me a lot of time to capture all this metadata and tag all my reports and, capture all this lineage information and all that. Just a lot. There's just a lot of time. It is work that feels to many people like a tedious process. Associating reports with KPIs and identifying where PI information is and coming up with definitions and terms, and it just feels kind of like most people would rather clean out their garage or do their tax return than they would want to go through some of the governance processes that are out there. It also feels like something that if you kind of ask people, they don't really think has a high value if they're being honest, or at least they'll feel like, well, there's value out there. I get that, we have compliance issues and things like that. We got to make sure we address that, but that value kind of accrues to somebody else. They don't feel like it accrues to them or accrues to the people that they directly are working with all the time. So, it's hard to motivate sort of activity in this area and engagement in this area because, well, I'm not really, for most of you people, they're like, I don't really see how it's really benefiting me, right? And then what happens as a result of these things is, unfortunately, governance gets stuck in the governance team, right? So executives say, okay, I need to deal with governance. Let me create a governance team. They will define the policies and they're responsible for it. And we all know, those of us that are on this call here, I think all know that just simply does not work. It doesn't scale. And any kind of large enterprise, any small team just cannot possibly address all of the governance needs. I mean, sure, you can set the policies, sure, you come up with processes, but you really need the entire organization to participate. So, that's the truth of where things are. What I want us to imagine in this meeting, and as we talk about this, and I want to tell you, it is absolutely possible to have a completely reimagined view of governance, and that reimagined view of governance has a few very different characteristics. One is it's largely automated, so governance where you're not relying for the majority of work to be done manually in setting it up. Where the value accrues to both the business users and the analysts in an organization. So the analysts that you ask to help with the governance process want to do so because they are not only are they benefiting from it, their colleagues are benefiting from it, but their users are benefiting from it. And so that's a key pillar. And then believe it or not, there is a way to make governance fun and make it something that people actually want to do and that they enjoy doing. And so this masterclass today is going to be really focused on how do we do that? How do we transform something that people think is really dull and boring with a capital B, right, into something that's fun, that they want to engage in, and that they're going to actually participate and do. So let's get started. So what are sort of the key pieces that we need to crack the governance code? Well, we really think about it in really four pillars, if you like, right? First of all, it's very important to come up with a solution that encourages broad participation, right? So based on what I mentioned before, right? As you know, if you have large organizations, you have thousands of reports. If you've got thousands or tens of thousands of users out there, and many hundreds of analysts, perhaps, you need participation from many people in order to be able to maintain a well-governed BI environment, right? So that's critical. It needs to be user-centric. So everything needs to be focused on how is this benefiting. Yes, of course, we have to meet compliance needs, but how is this going to benefit the users and the consumers? And that needs to be kind of a North Star through which you work with when you're thinking through how to solve for effective BI governance. And then it also should be gamified. So we want to leverage those things that really we know work with motivating people, where people are going to go and do things and want to compete to be more to show what they can do, and have those be smart about doing that within the governance system that we set up. And then finally, there has to be a balance here of carrots and sticks. And what I mean by that is, you've got to have these really fun incentives, make things that make people want to do it because there's rewards associated with doing governance. There have to be consequences as well, right? And you want to kind of have a nice balance there where it doesn't feel onerous. It feels fun, but people know that, hey, it's something you got to do at the end of the day. Right? And we'll talk about that in more detail. So let's drill down into each of these pieces and talk a little more about, well, what does that mean? What do you need, right? Oops, oh, something's wrong there. It didn't advance properly. I'm not sure why. Just go back here. Okay, so what does it mean to get broad participation, right? You've got to make sure that process works without kind of having a lot of pain for your users. So the keys to generating broad participation are, first of all, automating your much of what you need to collect with metadata. So we have the ability, the information's available there through APIs or other fashions to be able to determine for all your reports what tables they're using. If you have a data catalog that has the tables and KPIs associated with those tables somewhere, then we should be able to pull a lot of metadata and tie that together automatically. You shouldn't have to make the users add key metric information into each report when you already know what tables that report is using and which metrics are there. Similarly, there's all wealth of metadata in Power BI and Tableau and other tools that people have captured in there. You want to be able to bring that up and bubble it up into the automatically. So making it as automated as possible, where you're not repeating the process manual collecting data that's already exists out there that can be tied to the reporting objects. If there is, and there always will be typically some manual metadata that has to be added, maybe some things that are just not there in your data catalog, or maybe you don't have a data catalog, then you want to make sure that you're implementing a workflow where it's easy, that minimizes the number of clicks required to add the metadata. Right? So this is what I mean by user-centric, right? You're thinking about what's the experience that my user is going to have to do that. How can I make it feel like it's just super easy to do? That will increase adoption and makes it feel less painful to do this process. And then you want to think about it from the context of, you've got the centralized group, your governance team, your COE, if you like. Your team should be responsible for setting those guardrails, right? Like setting the overall requirements for the process. What do you need to do? What does certification mean? What metadata is required? But the execution of that process needs to be distributed. Right, so you want a model where you don't rely on the governance team to do everything, but rather they're setting the policies, and then the rest of the organization is coming in and actually implementing that. So when we talk about metadata for the people, user centric, the key thing is to first of all make sure that every piece of metadata that you're collecting, that you're putting into your standard, that you're saying, hey, this is what an item that we're publishing into our environment needs to have from a standardized perspective. Make sure it has a purpose, and it's also important to think about the fact that you can make those purposes as much as possible serve end users, because oftentimes it's even positioning. So I'll give you an example. Excuse me. If you have something like PII data, right? Or data classification. Maybe data classification is an even easier example. So I want to be able to classify information. How sensitive is this information? Well, you probably have compliance issues that require you to do that. But there's also a way to frame this to say, well, I can, how does having that information serve the users, right? And the way to think of it is, if you frame it and you deploy it in such a way that users understand that, well, you're putting the information about where the PI data is or where the data classification is, so that then their users, other people, can make sure that they don't misuse the information in a way that could be embarrassing to them, embarrassing to the company, a career-ending event for them potentially. Then that's serving those users. It's helping those users, right? So it's being thoughtful about what metadata you capture, and then being thoughtful about how you present the why behind that metadata capture to users. Second, very important factor, if you're thinking about sort of user focus, you have to make sure that all the metadata you're capturing that's useful is accessible at the point of consumptions where users are consuming the report. So there's not a lot of value if I capture a whole bunch of metadata and it's sitting in a data catalog where a handful of users are going in and looking at it. You absolutely need to bubble it up so that all of the users can see when they're using the report, oh, this contains PI data, I need to watch out for it. Oh, this is a restricted report, I better not share it within the rest of the organization. Oh, this is the key KPIs that this is using. Now I know how to interpret this information. So all of that information has to be bubbled to the point of consumption for governance to generate value to your users, right? And then you want to be thinking about the metadata that you're capturing and you're bubbling up in the way that where you ask the question, do I have the right metadata that supports both the needs of my analysts and the needs of my business users that are consuming this content, right? And because they're different needs, they need different metadata sometimes, but if you are effectively serving both, then you have this virtuous cycle where people start seeing the value being generated across the entire organization, and they want to participate simply because they can see the contribution that's being made. Okay, making it fun, right? That's important. So you want to tie into those dynamics that we just have as human beings. We are social animals. We're competitive animals. We're tribal. So create leaderboards. Who's complying, who's doing the best job of updating their metadata, right? Do public praise for top performers. Give away small gifts, things like that. People can say, oh, people with have the highest compliance by this date are going to get a dinner for two at a nice restaurant, or you're going to get some kind of other sort of an award. That you buy them a Lego set, whatever, right? Something that makes it fun, that people feel like, oh, I want to do this because I want to compete and I want to achieve these goals, both for the visibility that attains me, but also I want to show how great I am, right? So tap into that, and then you can also sort of gently rib anyone that's lagging, right? Now, of course, you're not publicly humiliating anyone, but you can sort of nudge them a little bit and publicly disclose, hey, here's the people that really need to improve, and make a little fun of it, make light fun of it, etc. So there's ways to kind of use both a carrot and stick approach with gamification to make that work. And then finally, when you're talking about carrots and sticks, right, you want to be thoughtful about it. So you want to have a generous grace period for compliance. That's a key thing. So you don't want to say, oh, we've rolled this out. Here's all the metadata you got to put in. Here's a process. No, we need to get this done in 1 week. Well, that's unrealistic, because we know that everyone has got a lot of work to do. People are busy, so you have to allow them time to implement it. If they don't implement it, you have to then have reminders, non-compliance, give them plenty of time. So be reasonable, right? Of course, you still need to be time bound, right? It can't be just take forever, but it needs to be something that's reasonable given the demands that the rest of the organization has. And then there has to be, at the end of the day, a stick, right? And that stick, one of the simplest, most effective ways to do it is you can say, well, we're going to have a process where if you do not comply, let's say within 90 days, within 60 days, whatever it is, if your content does not have the minimum requirements it needs to, we're going to archive it. It's going to be gone. And then if you want it back, you got to go put this information in, and then we can bring it back, right? So you need to get buy-in from your management to make sure that's something that you can be willing to do. Because if there's no consequence ultimately to not having governance, it's going to be very difficult to enforce it, right? But that consequence can be a last resort, not a first resort, and it ought to happen after some amount of time has passed that's reasonable, plus all the reminders and affordances have been made to make sure that people haven't just sort of forgotten about the process. So that can be achieved. So what should we measure, right? Like, let's imagine you've put together your governance process, and we'll talk in great detail here in a moment when we should show you a demo as well of how this works. But let's imagine you've put your governance process in place. What are the things you want to measure to be able to figure out whether your BI governance is effective, right? So you've identified, here's the KPI, here's the enterprise KPIs that need to be associated with my content. I need to certify it. I need to identify, key, whether the PI classification, other key metadata, etc. What should you measure? Well, one important thing, the simplest thing where you should probably start is make sure you've got an understanding of what is the completion rate. So if I've set 10 things that every report should have, what percentage does each report have, right? And measure that across a category, by group, by team. By the way, depending upon what the report is, which category it falls into, it may have a very different criteria that what needs to be met. So you need to be flexible and thoughtful about that. But whatever criteria has been set as the standard, measuring success towards that criteria is obviously a key starting point. But then you want to go further than that. I generally want to certify your content, right? You want to identify, hey, this is certified. And you want to make sure that when you set some criteria for what requires, what certification means. Oh, I know that, if there's bronze and silver and gold, there's different criteria for each one. And then measuring the adherence to say, did I, all the things that are gold certified, do they have these particular items associated with them? So having that measurements and then having a feedback loop on that is critical. And then finally, and this is the part that I think a lot of people forget about and don't look at carefully enough, you want to look at engagement around the content through the lens of your target audience. So every report or dashboard that gets created out there has an intended audience. Right, and this is not necessarily everyone that has access to it. Right, you may have a report and say, "Hey, I'm building this report, and I'm going to let everyone in finance see it." But the intended audience for this is to help with the close process. So it's the team that does the business close that I'm expecting to be able to use this report. Or this is the sales report that I'm expecting sales management to use to drive their attainment, right? And so I'm going to give access to it beyond sales management. I'm going to let the sales rep see it, but I'm really looking at sales management as the target audience. So if you understand that audience, what that audience is for each report, then one of the things you want to measure is not only how many people are using the report, but what percentage of your target audience is actually engaging with that report. And then who are the people outside your target audience that are engaging with that report? And that tells you two things. One is, did you actually reach the audience that you intended? And secondly, If there's a whole bunch of people that are accessing that are not part of that audience, well, that's interesting. Maybe there's some ancillary benefits. You can learn from that as a key signal towards other reports that are created. And we'll show you some examples of this in a moment so you can see what it looks like. So with now, when you think about this, when you think about the consumption layer, the fact that I'm going to be looking at governed content, it's very important to think about this through the right lens. And what I would propose, a metaphor that I like to use, I would encourage you to think about, is think of it as a garden, right? Like if you've gone to a nice botanical garden, or it has sort of the feeling of like a museum, right? Like everything is nicely groomed. There's a little placard next to each plant explaining to you what the plant is, interesting backstory around it, etc. So you want to have that same kind of experience. So you want, first of all, to have everything consumed through a single governed access point, whether that be a portal or hub or whatever, however you think of a catalog, whatever language you want to use around that. There should be one entry point for all the reports, whether that's a Power BI or Tableau or Click or whatever it is you're using, right? Any reports, anything used for analytics, it should all be accessible through a single pane of glass where you can apply governance consistently in that access point. And this should feel pretty obvious in this, if you think about it, because obviously if you have different entry points, if you're using one way to get into Power BI content, another way to get into Tableau content, and another way to get your SharePoint reports, then now all of a sudden you've got to apply governance consistently in three places, which is nearly impossible to do, right? It's tripled your workload. It's very hard to do. So making a single access point and having that a governed access point is important. And then you want to make sure that you can provide that access points as a entry level for search across everything that you've collected. So if you bothered collecting all these metadata, you've got to make sure it's accessible. I should be able to easily find everything that's certified. I should be able to easily find the things that have a certain classification, search on keywords, have natural language search, make it really easy and intuitive, right? So that the payoff to people from the governance initiative is that it's very easy to work with the content that's out there, right? And then most importantly, make sure that the garden truly has high quality content there, right? When you go to the botanical garden, they don't just plant any old weed in there. You go to the museum, they don't just take something and put anything out there. It's all thoughtfully out there. So having a process by which stuff gets out there, thoughtfully implemented, is very important. The second part of it is you want to see it as an ongoing process. So once you've established your garden, you need to weed that garden, right? You need to make sure that, reports that are not used all the time, the reports that are seldomly used, right? Making sure that those get removed, they're archived, they're pulled apart. Consolidating duplicates and similar reports. You don't want two of the same thing out there because it creates clutter and it's confusing to people. But there's always the chance of two reports that's similar generating different numbers that are going to create all kinds of havoc, right? So you want to make sure you're removing duplicates. And then you want to have an ongoing process to update or retire reports. They are just they were really useful 6 months ago or a year ago, but the business has changed and now they're no longer useful. Something else is out there that's more useful. Let's retire the old content. Again, it's in a way to kind of avoid building up cruft or building sort of overlapping content in the system. So let's dive all the way down into detail. Let's imagine now you're ready to set it up. You've thought this through. What are the steps? What are the step-by-step process that you would follow in order to do this? So first, you need to identify what your reports are. So if you've got a lot of reports, the easiest way to start is look at everything that has a certain level of activity, things that have usage beyond a certain threshold, right? That would be a good place to start. Then once you've got that, now that filter down list. So maybe you're starting with 1,000 reports, maybe only 300 of those have ever had usage in the last 60 days for more than 10 views or something like that, right? Whatever, or 100 views, whatever is appropriate for you. Set that threshold. Now look at the rest and identify similar reports. And we'll show you in more depth how you can do that in an automated fashion. Or of course, it can also be done in much more manually intensive process, but it can also be done manually. But identify which reports are similar and consolidate or deduplicate those. Then with that list, automate and enrich metadata in an automated fashion for anything that can be automated. So that includes lineage. It includes things that can be derived through lineage, other things that come from your data catalog, anything that you can bring in, things from your BI tools. Make sure that all that is pulled in. Once you've got that, now you publish that clean version of reports, used reports that are not duplicates, that have metadata. You publish those reports into a centralized portal. So it's single access point, that garden where people are going to be able to access it, right? And then you open it up and make it available for stakeholders to be able to come in, to update and review the content. So this is the process through which these things are used, but now you need your stakeholders to augment the metadata that's already been automatically collected from the BI tools, from data catalogs, from other sources, with any manually set metadata. And you're going to do that through a workflow, makes it easy for them to do it, but and there's going to be some period of time when they do that. Then you want a follow-up period. Hey, these reports, nobody's touched them. Nobody's updated this metadata. Things are going on. Make sure there's some kind of process through which you outreach to them, remind them, etc. And then at some point, auto-archive anything out of the portal that is not compliant, right? So it gives you that. That's the final stick in the process. And then you've got that set. Now you need an ongoing process for new reports because you've got your published set, but of course, as things progress, new BI analysts are building reports all the time. So there, you're going to, again, automatically flag duplicates, ideally before they're put in. If I create a report and I want to add it to the portal and there's already something out there, maybe I'm not aware of it because I don't have access to it, there should be a mechanism by which I realize that there's a duplicate there and I'm not going to be adding it, right? And then you want to have reports go into a workflow. So if I have a new report and it's ready to go, it goes into a workflow where then either I or someone else comes in. We add the additional metadata that needs to be added manually if it, after the automated metadata has been collected. And then once that's done, once the automated metadata is there and manually metadata has been added, then we publish to the portal. So it's kind of the same flow that you did on a macro level, but now you're doing it on an incremental, ongoing basis, with as much automation as possible, and making sure that the good new content is added to the portal. So net new things that are added after this initial publishing and review process is good, right? And then once that's done, now you've got this ongoing process to keep everything clean and organized, right? So you're going to review report engagement. So you're going to be looking at, who's using it, is the right audience being addressed there. You're going to collect user feedback. So the qualitative user feedback to understand, are users happy with these reports? Are there things missing? Make sure that feedback goes to the owners. Additionally, owners should be notified if their reports go unused. I published something and it was useful and it's not useful anymore. I want to be able to look at that. And then you also want to be able to update out-of-date reports. Right. So I want to be able to know that if I've got, so as a user, I get this information as an analyst, I'm going to be able to go in, I'm going to make changes to the reports. I'm going to make sure that if they're no longer needed, I'm going to remove them. But also maybe I need to just make some changes based on the feedback that I receive, based on the usage patterns, etc. And then again, an archiving process that removes things that are sitting there that are obsolete, that are unused, they're just not being used by anybody. And this process basically is the continuous cleaning process. You don't do this once a year through some massive spring cleaning exercise that requires everyone to take a lot of time. You just do it as part and parcel of the regular process of publishing new reports into your garden, into your catalog. So with that, let's dig into how does this really look, right? We've talked about this theoretically, but I'm going to pass this on to Mike, and he's going to show you examples of how all of these things actually work in practice.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So yeah, let's basically just go through that flow that Marius just spoke about and kind of bring it into reality a little bit. Obviously looking at how we do some of these things in the Metric Insights platform. And for those that have been on some of our previous sessions, there'll be some overlap with a few things that we've looked at, but we'll cover all the areas. So maybe let's start with sort of the end game here in terms of what does governance really mean, and what are we trying to strive towards for our end users. And as we said, it's this idea of a centralized portal or catalog hub, whatever you want to call it, where which is what you're seeing here, where users have one place to come and search and find and consume content irrespective of the tools. So this is the Metric Insights catalog. Each of these tiles that you're looking at here is a particular asset that has been through the process that we're going to look at, is sitting within the catalog regardless of the tool, whether it's Tableau, Power BI, SharePoint content, is sitting in the catalog and accessible to users who have the permissions to see them. And this whole talk of governance, what do we mean? Well, if an asset like this sales analysis report from Tableau here is fully governed, I should be able to see that it's got a level of certification and who certified it and when was that certified. And maybe let's click into the preview here. I should also have a full set of metadata associated with that asset that explains to me what it is, what it contains, maybe things like glossary terms. So, if it has sales, how is sales defined? How is profit defined in this particular asset? Who owns those definitions, maybe? Utilizing it to see what other reports are out there that contain those same definitions easily. And anything else, ownership. Marius talked a lot about data classification. So, with this report, what should I be conscious of when I'm using it? Is it confidential information that I shouldn't be emailing around or sharing publicly? So, the benefit to the end user is this idea of not just getting access to a report, but knowing it is the certified version and knowing exactly how I should interpret the data in there, down to things like lineage as well. So what tables or table is the content, is the data coming from to drive this particular report that I'm looking at or I'm going to access. And then it should be seamless for a user then to be able to come in and access that report. So Metric Insights, we embed that content. It's the live report within the idea of the portal here. And so I now didn't have to know that was in Tableau particularly, right? But I can access this alongside any other content. So maybe I'm accessing a PDF or a spreadsheet up on SharePoint or a file store. The process should be the same. I should be able to get access to metadata in a similar way and have the full context around it. So this idea of governing stuff in a consistent way, as Marius said. So that's what we're striving towards. So, where does it start? Well, it starts by that first step that we touched on in the flow, which is about sort of cleaning up what's there today. So, we're not starting from scratch in terms of BI. There's thousands, tens of thousands of reports out there. So how do you decide what you initially onboard into the portal? Marius gave some ideas like looking at usage potentially, how often have things been used in the last 60, 90 days. Using that as a way of sort of putting a stake in the ground and saying, okay, this is what we're going to publish to start with. So in order to do that in a productive way and in an automated way or a semi-automated way, we need to be able to connect to all these sources. So in this case, I'm connecting to a Power BI tenant. I'm looking at a Tableau server here. And being able to ingest metadata around the content that's out there for the content on these different instances. So what you're seeing here is a page that is, again, connecting to Power BI and Tableau. This is representative of the organizational structure on those tools. So these are the sites and projects that we have on Tableau and the workspaces in Power BI. And by looking at the metadata, and in this case usage, we're identifying unused reports that are out there. So reports that have had no views in the last 90 days. I can go into a particular workspace in site in Tableau and see a bunch of different reports that have had no views. When were they created? Who owns those reports? who has permissions to access them, even though it's not getting any views at this point. And I can start to look at this and see, okay, are these reports that are obsolete and that maybe we should retire, or what should we do with them? So looking at usage, obviously distributing this based on ownership of these reports so that people can make those sort of decisions, but focusing on unused reports initially is one thing. Secondly, then we can start to look at consolidating things further by looking at, well, obviously duplicate reports. So if there are exact copies of things out there, we want to be aware of that, but also looking at very similar reports that maybe are opportunities for consolidation. And we drilled into this in a previous session in a lot more detail, but the idea again is that we can uh, connect to these different tools. So Power BI, Tableau in this case. Again, we're ingesting metadata that we'll drill into in a second, but we're identifying clusters of similar reports that are out there that, again, are opportunities for consolidation. So if I take something like this sales analysis report here and click on it, what that's found is that there's, what have we got here, half a dozen other reports, potentially across tools and technology, that have this idea of a high overlap score. And the overlap score is based on the metadata that we're capturing for these reports. So things like what tables are they built on, what names and descriptions do they have, what columns are they using to generate this idea of an overlap score that suggests that these might be candidates for consolidation. And the idea is that I can go through a workflow again to say, okay, if I take one of these candidates and compare it to the main report that we found, what's happening here? Well, in this case, it had a high overlap score. It's using the same report columns. Each of these two reports are pulling in the same report columns in terms of dimensions and metrics. They're both based on the same database table. It's daily sales summary table, and they're both pulling in the same columns from that table, and they've both got similar sort of general metadata in terms of names and descriptions. And so the idea is I can take that and I can say, okay, this is potentially a very similar report that we may want to combine or get rid of one. I can then assign that to the owner and say, hey, take a look at this, and let's see if we can tidy this up, or is it something that we should remove from this cluster because we actually need both of these reports. So we can go through an initial exercise of cleanup and making sure that we're focusing on a core set of content that we want to make available. Next step then is making sure we can then pull what's left into this centralized portal that we looked at initially. And we do that in as automated fashion as possible. So we set up this idea, or you need to set up this idea of connectors to the systems again. So maybe we're connecting to a Power BI or a Tableau or a Click tenant. This connector is going to, again, look at work with the APIs of that underlying tool. So we're connecting to our instance of Power BI here. We're authenticating so that we can work with the APIs of Power BI. And we're bringing back automatically all sort of the remaining objects that are out there that we want to publish for our end users. So this connector here is going and tracking all the reports and dashboards that are out in the workspaces that we're focused on. It's also pulling in metadata about those assets. So everything we've been talking about, names, descriptions, but also things like lineage. So what tables is a particular Power BI report built off of, and what columns are being used within those tables. And then what we're doing is we are basically then turning on this idea of content synchronization so that we're pulling all that content with its metadata, with its information into that initial catalog that we're looking at here. So it's assigning it to categories on the left-hand side here, and it's ensuring that that content then becomes available to end users. Now, as part of that as well, we are also pulling in permissions as well from the underlying tools. So, who has access to what? So obviously then that gets persisted within the catalog. So only users who have access to reports are seeing them when they come in. And so what that gives us then is a set of content with a level of metadata that is useful to users that we've been able to capture automatically, but probably not the full set of metadata that we ultimately want, as Marius said, because there's some manual effort that needs to be carried out. Okay, so then we have to say, okay, we're going to go through that content and we're going to start enriching it to get it to the level of compliance that we want for our governance rules that we have in place. And so in order to do that, what we want to set up and define is, okay, what level of metadata is needed to achieve a certain level of certification within the portal. And we'll go with sort of the bronze, silver, gold level here. And that should define sort of the scrutiny, if you like, and the level of metadata that has been added to a particular report. So again, the end user has this knowledge to know that a gold level certification has been through a series of checks and balances and has a certain level of metadata available to help them use it versus what was done at the bronze and silver level. So you need a way of being able to sort of set up these rules, defining what's needed at each level. So at the silver level here, I require that a business owner has been assigned to it, that a data steward has been assigned to it, that has a description and obviously a name, and maybe the person who created the asset in the first place. Versus, at the gold level, we also require that it's got comprehensive documentation associated with it. So I need to define those rules and then effectively benchmark what's happening within our portal to say, okay, what level of compliance do we have at this point? So, for all the content that is out there, how much of it is compliant based on those rules and the level of certification it has? And more importantly, some of it might be over certified almost. So we've filled in stuff that's not critical for that level of certification, but it's certainly doing no harm. And then there's stuff that's certified maybe at the gold level, but it's missing criteria that we want to pull in. So you want to identify the gaps across the different areas. And be able to effectively let the owners of those reports know what's going on. So, if I'm responsible for the monthly sales report, make it easy for me to say, okay, here's the gaps in metadata that is required to achieve certain levels of certification. So even to get a bronze level, I need to make sure that there's a business owner associated with this report. And in this case, there isn't. To achieve a gold level, I have to make sure this has documentation associated with it. So I can go through each of the reports and understand, where the gaps are. And we need to be able to sort of help users with the process. So, as Marius said, this needs to be a distributed process. So if users have non-compliant reports, we want to be messaging them, we want to be helping them, we want to be telling them where the gaps are that they need to fill in. And again, put a time frame on when that needs to be achieved by. Otherwise, we're going to archive these and take them out of the portal. We then want to think about sort of, Marius called it sort of gamification, but what's the sort of competition we want to put in place here to help drive participation in this? So if we think of all the people creating content across the organization, we want to be tracking what's going on there. So, I've got 50 people creating reports here, and we want to be tracking compliance against those rules that we put in place. So, for each user down here, how many reports do they have published in the portal? How many of those are compliant, and what percentage is compliant? And then we can do things like rank them against each other in sort of a leaderboard. Say, okay, week on week, how are you doing compared to your peers? What are the top movers this week? Who's made the biggest jump in terms of making sure that their content is governed versus the participants here who have not met a good threshold in terms of the percentage of compliant content that they have out there. So make it transparent to everyone in terms of what's going on, who's doing well, who needs to catch up here, and get their stuff compliant as quickly as possible. Otherwise, again, it's going to be archived in the future. Do that at the individual level as well. So drilling down, making someone who's responsible for this process, give them visibility into what's going on, gently prod them in terms of getting up to speed. So, do things like this. So for Marcus, who's creating reports in the marketing group, he's got 47 reports out there, 32 of which are compliant, 15 still have gaps in them in terms of metadata. And he's actually running below the average in terms of compliance across everyone who's creating content. But again, help him out and show which reports are lacking, where do they have issues, what's missing, so that, again, he can work through these and get them up to speed. Also show that audience engagement that Marius was talking about. So, for a report, just refresh here. For a report, obviously it has a total audience in terms of who has permissions to access it, often driven by the security and groups that you have, whether it's AD or within the tools themselves. But within that total audience, this is a report that's aimed at sort of managers in the sales organization, even though marketing might have access and other areas. And so there's a subset of that target audience, which you really want using it. So, what percentage of that target audience is engaged? And let's again rate people around that and the individual reports, and they can track overall what is the percentage engagement within their target audience. And then maybe look at sort of outside of that target audience, who is actually accessing that report, because it may give you some ideas in terms of, expanding the reach and the goals of what this particular report is. All of that, again, should be I should be able to notify users, so not rely on them to come in and look at this stuff automatically. Send them messages via email that has that information in it, so that we're gently prodding them to get things up to scratch. So we've given that area, we've gone through that sort of period of trying to get people, encouraging them, motivating them to get their content certified and fully compliant with the rules that we've put in place. So we've archived then content that hasn't met compliance, and we've taken it out. So now we have a fully set of certified content within the portal, but people are creating new content all the time. So how do we stop getting in the mess again? As new content is getting created, we want to assign it to an appropriate workflow process. And by that, I'm talking about sort of a publishing workflow process that is appropriate for the content that's being created. And think of it as sort of a multi-step process where different stakeholders, maybe the developer, the business owner, the governance team, are, where necessary, getting involved in terms of reviewing content. So it gets assigned to a queue. Maybe the developer picks it up. He or she reviews the content. Maybe he then passes it on, signs off on it, and passes it on to the business owner. They may be responsible for adding in some additional metadata like documentation or tagging it whatever, setting the classification before it goes on to the governance team, who again may be responsible for enriching it with more metadata before ultimately it gets certified and published into the portal. And these workflows should be appropriate for again, the type of content that we're putting out there. So, highly governed reports might go through a multi-step process like this and get a gold certification at the end of it. Maybe reports, they're just being used in our department or in our team, go through a single step process where the developer's taking care of all that, but it gets a slightly lower level of certification involved. So it goes through a certification process and gets published into the portal, this time with the necessary level of metadata and scrutiny that we want. You then need to automate the sort of review process. So we're into sort of the third wheel, if you like, the third cycle of ongoing weeding of the garden, as Marius referred to it, where all content that gets added into the catalog probably has a shelf life associated with it. So it becomes less useful over time, potentially, as the business changes and the way we change things, for whatever reason. And so we want to make sure that we're reviewing content and attesting to the fact that it's still relevant or not on a periodic basis. So these workflows should have a review stage or an attestation stage where maybe if anything changes or after a period of time, they get flagged for review to say, okay, put them back in the queue. Let's make sure this is still relevant to the organization and is still meeting our criteria for the level of certification that it has, which also may change over time, and we have to review what reports are no longer compliant with that level. When something comes up for review, we want to be able to say, okay, is it still relevant to the organization? Not just is it still compliant, but is it still relevant to the organization? And typically, we'll look at sort of two indicators to help us make that decision. One is, again, going back to our usage stats and saying, okay, what are the, for those reports that are up for review, are they getting used? Are they getting engagement still on an ongoing basis? So here you're looking at the most used reports. There's reports that are still increasing in terms of their usage and usefulness. But there's also reports that have been flagged that are trailing off in terms of usage, or indeed have become unused within there. So usage is a good indicator of whether something obviously is still relevant to the organization. But tying that as well with a feedback mechanism, a subjective feedback mechanism from the user base. So when you publish reports into the portal or into a portal, making sure that you're prompting people for feedback or that you're allowing them to subjectively give feedback. Maybe it's sort of NPS style ratings, maybe it's capturing subjective comments from the user base. So that, again, if this sales analysis report comes up for review, I can look at the engagement and I can compare that to the subjective scores and comments that my end users are giving me. And so, with that, if it's not getting used much, I can either update the report based on the comments, or I can retire it if it's become obsolete to our user base. So that was sort of a whirlwind tour through the process that Marius touched on in the slides, and hopefully all of this has given you an idea around how you can start to drive better engagement and participation within with the governance processes and requirements that you have in your organization. So with that, let's maybe answer some questions. I know a few have come in here. Marius, maybe you can come back online.
Yep, I'm here.
We've got maybe 5 minutes here, I think, to look at things. So lots of people asking for a copy of the slides. So yeah, maybe So we're certainly sending out a recording. I can see people are dropping their name in here. If you want a copy of the slides, drop your name in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll send that out directly to you. Okay, let's look at the questions, Marius. Can ChatGPT and Agentic replace your app? I mean, the manager say I can do all this, simply asking AI. So I guess also, how does AI, I guess, factor into some of this process as well? Got
Yeah,
some thoughts?
so I mean, we had a kind of a discussion at the beginning. The first series of the masterclass, I think, had to do with AI, and so I'd encourage you, anyone interested in kind of check that out, and specifically AI for BI and the state of play of that, and how does it fit in. I think it's not no, it certainly does not. The having AI neither replaces the need for a portal or catalog, nor does it replace the need for BI tools. It is for the simple fact that it is again, looking at this from a user-centric point of view, certainly when I want to ask a question, having AI there as a tool is great, and it might replace the need for me to reach out to a business analyst for that same question and to get an answer. But if I just want to see at a glance how all my KPIs are performing, then the right tool for that is a dashboard, because that's what is going to present it to me with the least amount of friction. I can just glance at that and I see the answer versus having to ask, 20 minutes worth of questions and wait for responses to get that same information through a conversation, right? So and if I'm going to be doing that, if in fact there's sort of both of those modalities, both the asking the questions and the consumption of the information, if those both exist and there are different tools that are required, then I need governance. I need governance across both. So many of the things that Mike has mentioned here, as you bring on additional AI tools on board, as you bring out talk to your data solutions, other things, you're going to want to put them to exactly the same level of governance. So there's that layer. There's sort of another layer. I mean, again, this is probably too much of a discussion for a quick answer, but obviously AI is a tool to facilitate some of these things, to auto-populate content, to make suggestions, etc. Very powerful and very much something you want to be leveraging. You have to do so with a lot of discretion, because you want to make sure that you're not pushing junk into the system. You want to, so everything, today's state, you do need a human in the loop for sort of confirming metadata tagging and things like that, because otherwise you end up getting slop in your environment, and the slop is the absolute enemy of governance, right? Everything has to be, somebody has to be accountable for the fact that this is certified and they've reviewed it, and it meets the criteria.
Couple of questions here around sort of tracking usage, the similar in terms of their intent. So one here, do users typically only navigate to reports through the portal, and can they then access them directly through the tool like Tableau? How does that impact engagement? And do you have any mitigation suggestions? So I think you're right. There's, the idea with a portal is that the majority of business users or business users in whole are accessing content through the portal, but you are always going to get some access directly within the tool itself. Whether that's because, it's an analyst and that's where they work, and, they only look at a Tableau and a certain set of content within there, whatever the reason, you will get some usage directly within the tool. And so it's important, and it's what we do when we capture usage, is we're actually, where it's available, we're pulling usage from the tool as well. So we're not relying on just tracking usage within our product through the API. We're pulling usage from the underlying tools and sort of marrying that together so we can see who's accessing it through the portal versus accessing it directly. So you need to be taking both into account for sure when you're making decisions on whether to keep a report or not. All right, how are we doing for time here? If we
I
don't
think
get to all the
we're at time,
questions,
I think, so
are
we'll
we?
have to,
Okay.
yeah.
Looks like we're at time. There's a few other questions here in the chat. We'll follow up with these as we do the follow-up with recordings as well, and I see a lot of people asking for the slides, so we'll make sure to get those out to you. But thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully this was useful to you. Again, the previous sessions are available on YouTube, and Yeah, we look forward to hopefully having you join us at the next one on the 8th of October, where we're going to be delving into sort of an extension of this in terms of how can we leverage the data catalog in some of these processes to get better value across the board, particularly for our business users. So thanks for your time. Thanks, Marius.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks everyone for joining us.